In this eerie and atmospheric retelling of the classic vampire tale, Thomas Hutter, a young and ambitious real estate agent living in the fictional German town of Wisberg, is driven by a desire to provide a better life for his beautiful, ethereal wife, Ellen. Despite their deep love, Ellen is plagued by dark premonitions and a morbid sensitivity to nature and death, often feeling as though she is a puppet moved by an unseen, grave force. Their domestic peace is interrupted when Thomas's employer, the eccentric and mysterious Herr Knock, offers him a lucrative but daunting assignment: travel deep into the Carpathian Mountains to finalize a property sale with a reclusive nobleman named Count Orlok. Knock, who seems to be under some form of hypnotic or occult influence, describes Orlok as a member of a very old line of nobility who wishes to retire to Wisberg, specifically requesting the dilapidated Grunwald Manor located directly across from the Hutter's home. The journey begins with a sense of adventure, but as Thomas crosses into the rugged landscapes of Transylvania, the atmosphere shifts from idyllic to oppressive. At a local inn near the Arniak Pass, the mere mention of Orlok's name strikes terror into the hearts of the locals. They warn Thomas that the Count is not for the living and beg him to beware of a shadow that creates a waking nightmare from which there is no escape. Thomas, a man of modern science and reason, dismisses their fears as peasant superstition, even as he witnesses a group of Romani people performing a frantic ritual to ward off an unclean spirit. However, his skepticism begins to fracture when his coachman refuses to take him all the way to the castle. He is eventually met by a silent, black-clad driver in a carriage that moves with unnatural speed, surrounded by the haunting howls of wolves. Upon arriving at the crumbling, skeletal fortress of Castle Orlok, Thomas meets the Count, a figure of terrifying physical deformity, gaunt, pale, with elongated fingers and rat-like features. Orlok is a creature of the night who speaks in wheezing breaths and moves with a predatory stillness. During their first dinner, Thomas accidentally cuts his finger, and the Count's reaction, a mixture of visceral hunger and repulsive fascination, reveals his true nature. Orlok is not merely an eccentric nobleman, he is a vampire, a spirit of any celestial sphere called back from an eternity of darkness. Despite the mounting horror, Thomas completes the transaction. When Orlok sees a miniature portrait of Ellen, he becomes obsessed with her lovely neck and her nonpareil beauty, remarking that they are now neighbors. The narrative shifts between Thomas's imprisonment in the castle and Ellen's deteriorating mental state in Wisberg. As Orlok prepares to travel to Germany by sea, hidden within coffins filled with his ancestral soil and a swarm of plague-carrying rats, Thomas discovers the Count's true form resting in a crypt. Realizing the danger his wife is in, Thomas attempts a desperate escape, but he is injured and left to recover in a local hospital, far behind the Count's supernatural pace. Meanwhile, in Wisberg, Ellen's sleepwalking episodes grow more frequent and intense. She senses the approaching darkness, feeling the Count's presence across the ocean. Her dreams of holding hands with death begin to manifest as a psychic connection to the vampire, who is bringing a literal and metaphorical plague to her shores. As the ship carrying Orlok reaches Wisberg, the crew is systematically slaughtered, leaving a ghost ship to drift into the harbor. The town is quickly plunged into chaos as the rats bring a pestilence that decimates the population. The authorities blame the plague, but Ellen knows the truth. She reads a forbidden book about the Nosferatu, which reveals that the only way to defeat the vampire is for a sinless woman to distract him with her blood until the first light of dawn. The story culminates in a haunting sacrifice. Ellen, realizing that Thomas cannot save her and that the town is doomed, intentionally beckons the Count to her window. In a scene of chilling intimacy and horror, Orlok feeds on her as the night wanes, forgetting the approach of morning. As the sun rises, the vampire is consumed by the light, vanishing into smoke, but the victory is bittersweet as Ellen dies in Thomas's arms, having surrendered her life to banish the shadow. Despite the warnings of local villagers, Thomas enters Orlok's crumbling castle, only to find himself trapped in a nightmare. The Count, a grotesque and predatory vampire, becomes obsessed with a locket belonging to Thomas, which contains a portrait of his wife, Ellen. Orlok's interest is not merely physical but spiritual. He sees in Ellen a promised gift and begins to project his dark influence across the continent even before he departs his castle. As Orlok begins his journey to Wisberg by sea, Thomas finds himself a prisoner of the Count's supernatural power. In a desperate attempt to escape the castle's suffocating evil, Thomas discovers Orlok sleeping in a soil-filled coffin, a sight that nearly shatters his sanity. He eventually manages to flee, but he is left physically and mentally broken, eventually finding refuge in a Romanian convent where nuns attempt to heal his spirit from the shadow of the Black Enchanter. Meanwhile, the Count travels aboard the ship Empusa, hidden among crates of cursed earth and a swarm of rats. One by one, the crew falls victim to a mysterious plague, until only the captain remains, lashed to the wheel as the vessel drifts toward the German coast like a ghost ship. In Wisberg, Ellen Hutter is increasingly tormented by a profound, psychic connection to the approaching vampire. She suffers from severe bouts of somnambulism, sleepwalking, and terrifying visions. Her friend Friedrich Harding and his wife Anna watch in horror as Ellen's condition worsens. To the local doctors, her malady is a medical mystery, a congestion of the blood, but to Ellen, it is a visceral haunting. She screams in the night, sensing the predator's proximity, and begins to speak in tongues, prophesying the arrival of a specter of death. Seeking a cure that traditional medicine cannot provide, Friedrich and the local physician Dr. Sievers consult Professor Albin Eberhard von Franz, a disgraced scholar of the occult and alchemy. Von Franz, a man who has traded his reputation for the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, recognizes Ellen's condition as something far more sinister than hysteria. During a harrowing consultation, he puts Ellen into a deep trance. To the horror of those present, Ellen's voice changes into a guttural, demonic rasp. The entity speaking through her claims she is promised to him and predicts a coming apocalypse where the living will be knee-deep in blood. Von Franz concludes that Ellen is not sick in the traditional sense, but conductive to cosmic evil. She is a beacon for a demonic force that has chained itself to her soul. The chaos in the town is mirrored by the madness of Herr Nock, Thomas's former employer. Nock has been committed to a mental asylum after being found eating raw sheep at a Christmas market. In his cell, he descends into a state of religious mania, worshipping Orlok as his lordship and infinity. He senses the Count's arrival before anyone else, cackling about the blood being the life and the devourance that is about to be unleashed upon the city. When the Empusa finally drifts into the Wisberg harbor, it brings with it a literal and metaphorical darkness. The town officials discover the crew dead and the ship infested with rats, leading to an immediate declaration of plague. As the death toll rises and the black crosses are painted on the doors of the doomed, the veil between the natural and supernatural dissolves. Thomas finally returns to Wisberg, gaunt and haunted, reuniting with Ellen. However, the joy of their reunion is overshadowed by the realization that the Count has arrived. Thomas confesses that Orlok has his locket, confirming Ellen's deepest fears. The monster has not just come for the city, but specifically for her. The atmosphere in Wisberg becomes one of suffocating dread. The plague spreads rapidly, but von Franz and Ellen know that the rats are merely the harbingers of a much older predator. Ellen realizes that she is the only one who can stop the Count, but the cost will be her own life. The summary of these events paints a picture of a world where science is helpless against ancient superstition, and where love is the only thing that remains in the face of absolute putrescence. As the Count moves through the shadows of the city toward the Hutter residence, the stage is set for a final, sacrificial confrontation between the purity of Ellen's soul and the eternal hunger of the vampire. In the final act of this Gothic nightmare, the boundary between the physical plague and the supernatural presence of Count Orlok dissolves entirely. The film reaches its zenith as Orlok, speaking with a wheezing, ancient rasp, reveals his true intentions for Ellen. He dismisses his servant, the madman Nock, with cold cruelty, asserting that the broker's pretty belonging cannot be simply stolen. According to an ancient, dark compact, Ellen must willingly pledge her vow to him. Orlok prepares to claim his prize as the dawn bells of Wisberg begin to toll, not for a holiday, but in despair for the city's soul. While the city remains gripped by the blood plague, Professor von Franz and Dr. Sievers discover a horrifying anomaly. Examining the body of a victim, they find it entirely drained of blood, marked not by standard rat bites, but by the massive, puncture-like wounds of a leviathan pests. When Nock escapes the asylum after murdering a porter, von Franz realizes that the situation has bypassed the limits of modern science. He informs Friedrich Harding and Thomas Hutter that they are not dealing with a mere epidemic, but with the vampire Nosferatu death itself manifested. Inside the Hutter household, the atmosphere is suffocating. Thomas is haunted by visions of the Count, gasping for air as if the vampire's shadow is physically crushing his chest. Ellen, meanwhile, begins to accept her role in this cosmic tragedy. She reconciles with her friend Anna, gifting her a music box before the darkness truly descends. That night, Ellen is visited by Orlok in a spectral, terrifying confrontation. The Count taunts her, claiming that Thomas sold her to him for a sack of gold and that her very nature is bound to his. He presents a horrific ultimatum: he will leave her for 3 nights. On the 3rd night, she must submit to him freely, or Thomas will perish, and the world will be consumed by his devourance. As the 2nd night passes, the plague accelerates. The hospitals are overrun, and the city is placed under a strict, desperate quarantine. Friedrich's wife, Anna, falls ill, and in his grief-stricken state, Friedrich lashes out at Ellen and the professor, dismissing their medieval devilry even as his own world collapses. He orders Thomas and Ellen to leave, unaware that he is sending them directly into the center of the storm. The tension between Thomas and Ellen reaches a breaking point as the truth comes to light. Ellen confesses to Thomas that her melancholy was never an illness, but a lifelong connection to Orlok. She reveals that Orlok claims Thomas traded her for his own advancement. Thomas, shattered by the accusation and the horror of his experiences at the castle, watches as Ellen descends further into a trance-like state. She tells him that they are already dead and that their marriage was a hollow shield against a predator who has known her soul since childhood. In a moment of madness and desperation, she demands Thomas kiss her heart so that the Count might see their love, a scene that borders on the ritualistic and the hysterical. On the 3rd and final night, the protagonists divide their forces. Thomas, Friedrich, and von Franz head to Grunewald Manor to find Orlok's coffin, hoping to sanctify the earth and drive a spike through the monster's heart. However, von Franz harbors a darker suspicion. He knows that the iron spike may be useless and that the only true way to break the curse is through the sacrifice of a maiden fair. He allows the hunt to proceed, knowing it is likely a false hunt, while the real battle takes place in the Hutter bedroom. At the manor, they find the madman Nock guarding the Count's empty sanctuary. Nock, having relinquished his soul to be the Prince of Rats, realizes too late that Orlok has no loyalty to him. Thomas kills Nock in a fit of rage, but the realization hits them all: Orlok is not in his coffin. He is with Ellen. Von Franz, seemingly accepting the cold necessity of the occult laws he has studied, declares that Ellen's dark bond is the only thing that can redeem the city. He watches as the sun begins to rise, shouting that the pure light will soon lift the plague, provided the sacrifice is complete. Back at the Hutter residence, the film culminates in a hauntingly intimate and grotesque encounter. Ellen, dressed in white, calls out to Orlok, bidding him to come to her. The Count enters her room not as a monster, but as a suitor of the grave. He asks if she accepts him of her own will. She confirms she does, pledging the oath that fulfills the ancient covenant. In a scene of terrible beauty and horror, Orlok feeds upon Ellen. The act is portrayed as both a violation and a dark, ecstatic union. As he gulps her blood, the world outside begins to change. The first cock crows. Orlok, so distracted by the purity and potency of Ellen's blood, fails to notice the approaching dawn. As the 2nd and 3rd roosters crow, the sun's rays strike the room. The vampire, trapped by the willing sacrifice of the woman he coveted, groans in agony. The sunlight acts as a purifying fire, and Orlok shrieks as his physical form dissolves into nothingness, the curse finally broken. Thomas arrives just as the sun floods the chamber, but he is too late to save his wife. He finds Ellen's lifeless body on the bed, her sacrifice complete. The film ends on a note of profound melancholy. While the plague of Nosferatu is lifted from Wisburg and the city is saved, the cost is the life of the one person who truly understood the darkness. Professor von Franz recites the final lines of the ancient codex, acknowledging that the maiden fair has freed them all through her love and her death. The day of doom has been averted, but the survivors are left to wander a world that is now permanently scarred by the memory of the shadow. If you enjoy watching this video, then subscribe to Angel Recaps for the latest movies explanation.